The aroma of rosemary and garlic was the first thing that hit me when I walked through the door. It was a stark contrast to the usual takeout smell that permeated our apartment on most weeknights. Mary stood by the kitchen counter, her back to me, humming a tune I didn't recognize. She was wearing that emerald green dress I loved, the one she usually saved for special occasions. The soft glow of candlelight danced across the walls, casting long, flickering shadows. It was unexpected, to say the least. "Wow," I said, hanging my coat on the hook, "what's all this?" She turned around, a dazzling smile lighting up her face. "Surprise. I thought we deserved a nice, romantic evening." She gestured to the table, where 2 plates were set with what looked like homemade lasagna and a bottle of red wine sat uncorked. It was the kind of scene I'd always dreamed of, a far cry from our usual routine of rushed meals in front of the TV. For a moment, I forgot about the tension that had been simmering between us for months, the coldness that had become a constant in our home. We sat down, the candlelight painting her face in warm, inviting hues. She poured the wine, her eyes sparkling. She was playing the part of the loving wife to perfection, and I almost bought it. Almost. The conversation was light, filled with easy laughter and reminiscent stories from the early days of our relationship. It was unnervingly good, a performance so convincing it made me feel like I was watching a movie of our past. I found myself relaxing, momentarily falling into the comforting illusion of us. It was a stark contrast to the coldness I felt from her just days before, the way she had started pulling away, the late nights at work, the hushed phone calls. After dinner, we moved to the living room, the soft jazz filling the space. She poured us each another glass of wine. I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me, the kind that comes from pretending everything is okay when it's far from it. I reached into my pocket, pulling out the crumpled receipt I'd found tucked away in her purse the day before, the one she'd apparently forgotten about. It was a detail I'd been waiting for, a crucial piece of the puzzle. "Hey, babe," I started, trying to keep my voice even, "what was the name of that hotel you mentioned staying at last weekend? The one where you went for that work conference?" Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of panic momentarily eclipsing the warm facade. "Oh, it was the Grand Vista," she said, her voice a little too high-pitched. I unfolded the receipt, the name of the hotel printed in clear, unforgiving letters, the Sunset Inn. A smaller detail printed below the hotel name, a date that made my heart drop like a stone, a date that coincided with what she said was her conference, and not a single night included in her business trip. I held the receipt up, letting the candlelight illuminate the damning evidence. The silence in the room was deafening. Her face drained of color as she stared at the receipt. A gasp escaped her lips, and the wine glass slipped from her grasp, shattering on the floor, red wine spreading like blood across the rug. The illusion shattered along with the glass. Her eyes darted around the room, a cornered animal looking for an escape route. How did you get that?" she stammered, her voice trembling. "It was in your purse, Mary." "A pretty bad hiding spot, for someone who thinks they're so smart," I said, my voice dangerously calm. The rage, a cold, controlled fury, was bubbling beneath the surface. The truth poured out of her like a festering wound. The late nights at work were nights spent with him. The business conferences were just weekends at seedy hotels. The hushed phone calls were not about work or some family member's health. They were declarations of love, promises of a future that had no place for me. I watched, numb, as her carefully constructed world crumbled around her. "It was a mistake. I don't know how it happened," she blurted out, tears streaming down her face. They were crocodile tears, I knew. The kind that had always worked on me, but not anymore. "A mistake," I echoed, my voice laced with a sarcasm I didn't know I possessed. "You made a conscious decision to betray me, to lie to my face. And you call that a mistake?" I got up and left the apartment, leaving her there amongst the broken glass and her lies. I had one more task to do, one that would give me some semblance of closure. The address she had given her lover was on the receipt. I drove to the other side of town, to a neighborhood far from our own, and parked a block away from the house that was on the receipt. I wanted to see him, the man who had dared to break the vows of my marriage, the man who had stolen my wife, my life, from me. The house was small and unremarkable, a far cry from the luxurious life he was probably imagining. I waited until I saw him leave, a tall, lanky figure with an arrogant swagger. He looked exactly like what I thought he would. I followed him, keeping my distance, my anger growing with every step he took. He went to a small bar, the kind with dim lighting and a perpetual smell of stale beer. I waited outside until he came out, a few drinks probably having made him believe he was invincible. He was laughing at some private joke, a smug look on his face. I crossed the street and stood in his path. He stopped, confused, not knowing what was coming. "You're Jay, right?" I asked, keeping my voice low and steady. He sized me up, his eyes narrowed. "Yeah, that's me." "Who the hell are you?" "I'm Mary's husband." The smirk on his face vanished, replaced by a look of alarm. He tried to walk past me, but I grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "We need to talk," I said, my grip tightening. He tried to pull away, but I held on, dragging him towards the alleyway next to the bar. The look on his face was one of pure, unadulterated fear. "Good." I backed him up against the brick wall. The rage took over, a physical force that propelled my fist towards his face. The first blow landed hard, the sound of bone on bone echoing in the narrow alley. He groaned, his hand going up to his nose. "You think you can just waltz into my life and take what's mine?" I roared, each word laced with the fury that had been brewing inside me for months. I hit him again and again, each blow fueled by the betrayal I felt. I didn't care who saw, what people thought, the only thing I felt was satisfaction. His face was a mess of blood and bruises, his confident swagger completely gone. I had his attention now, he understood this wasn't some fantasy where he had all the power. He was weak. I dropped him to the floor, my anger subsiding, leaving behind a hollow ache. "Stay away from my wife," I spat, my voice raspy. "If I ever see you near her again, I promise you, this will be the least of your problems." I walked away, leaving him huddled on the ground, his dreams and his facade shattered into a million pieces. I felt no remorse, only the bitter satisfaction of knowing he'd gotten what he deserved. I went back to the apartment, the scene of domestic bliss now replaced with chaos. Mary was sitting on the couch, her face swollen and tear-stained. I walked past her without a word. There was no point. We were over. I started to pack my things, methodically placing them in boxes. She watched, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and sorrow. I didn't look at her once. It was over. There was no conversation, no final declaration of love lost. She was a stranger, a phantom of a woman I thought I knew. The rest of the evening passed in a daze. I had no idea what she would do, or what I would do for the matter. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that apartment any longer. I finished packing, looked around one last time, and walked out the door, leaving the pieces of my shattered life behind me.